The heat left the land like a held breath. Eli McRae sat his horse, Bolo, on the ridge, watching the last smear of bloody orange stain the western mountains. The air smelled of dust and creosote bush, the signature of the Arizona Territory. It was a hard, mean, beautiful country that asked nothing of a man but his bones, and Eli was getting closer to paying that debt. He was an old man. He felt it in the way his knees ached when the air cooled, and in the deep, settled weariness that lived behind his eyes. He had spent a lifetime running, first from the war in the East, then from the men he hunted for bounty, and finally, from himself. This small, remote homestead, tucked into the canyon lands where white settlement frayed and Apache land began, was not a home. It was an ending, a place to raise his few horses and wait, quietly, for the tally to be called. Bolo snorted, impatient for his grain. Eli nudged the gelding forward, down the familiar rocky path toward the small, sturdy cabin and corral he'd built with his own hands. He saw it from 50 yards out, a dark shape crumpled against the lower rail of his fence, right by the water trough. His first thought was a dead calf, dragged down by a coyote. His second, seeing it was too small, was a dog. His hand went from pure, ingrained habit to the stock of the Winchester in his saddle scabbard. He eased Bolo to a stop. "Oh, boy," he murmured. The shape did not move. Eli's instinct, honed by decades of survival, screamed at him. Ride past! Go to your cabin! Bar the door! Whatever is dead, let the buzzards have it! Whatever is dying, let it finish!" He had earned his isolation. He had paid for it with every scar on his body and soul. He was not a neighbor. He was not a savior. He was just Eli, waiting. But he didn't ride past. He sighed, a dry, rasping sound, and swung his stiff leg over the saddle. The landing sent a jolt up his spine. He walked forward slowly, his boots kicking up small puffs of alkali dust. It was a person. It was a woman. He got closer and his gut tightened into a cold knot. An Apache woman. Her black hair was matted with dirt and something dark and sticky. She was face down, her clothes a collection of torn calico and hide. And she was chained. A heavy iron manacle was clamped shut on her right wrist. The chain, about 3 feet of it, ended in a broken link, as if she had smashed it against a rock until it gave. He knelt, his joints protesting. He could smell the sickness on her, the sour, metallic tang of blood lost. Gently, he put his rough fingers against her neck. A pulse, thready, but there. "Well, hell," he whispered to the fading light. This was not a calf. This was trouble. This was the kind of trouble that brought pauses and soldiers and fire. This was the world he had tried to leave, crawling right to his fence line. He looked at the chain. He had seen men in chains. He had put men in chains. But this was different. This was raw. He looked at her back. A dark stain was spreading across the thin fabric, high on her left side, just below the shoulder blade, a bullet wound. He stood there for a full minute, caught between the man he was and the man he had forced himself to become. The man he was tired. He wanted to walk away. He wanted to pretend he'd seen nothing. But the man he used to be, the one he thought was long dead, could not abide the sight of that chain. It was an offense against something. He wasn't sure what anymore. God, decency, maybe just the dying light. With a groan, he bent and slid his arms under her. She weighed almost nothing. He lifted her, her head falling limp against his chest, and carried her toward the cabin. Bolo, left untethered, simply followed, his harness jingling in the profound quiet. He kicked the door open and carried her inside. The cabin was one room, sparse and clean. A cot, a stone hearth, a rifle rack with 3 guns, a table, and 2 chairs. It smelled of wood smoke, coffee, and horse liniment. He laid her on his own cot, the only one he had. For a moment, he just looked at her. She was young, maybe 20. Her face, beneath the grime, was taut with pain even in unconsciousness. He lit the lantern. The yellow light was kind, making the small space feel almost warm. Then he went to work. He lit the stove, put a kettle of water on to boil, and pulled out his supplies: a bottle of whiskey, clean flour sacks he used for rags, and the small leather roll that held his suturing needles and a sharp, thin knife. He had dug more lead out of flesh than he cared to remember, including his own. He cut the dress away from the wound. It was ugly, a side entry wound. The bullet was still in there, lodged shallow against a rib. She was lucky. If it had gone 2 inches deeper, it would have taken her lung. She didn't stir as he poured whiskey over the wound, cleaning it. She didn't flinch when he took the knife, sterilized in the boiling water, and made a small, precise cut. He probed with his finger, found the flattened piece of lead, and pulled it out with a pair of pliers. It clinked when he dropped it into a tin cup. He stitched the wound closed with the neat, practiced movements. He bandaged it tightly with the clean flour sacking. Only then did he deal with the manacle. He fetched his tool chest and took out a heavy file. He sat on the floor beside the cot, lifted her limp arm, and began the slow, grating work of sawing through the iron. Zit, zit, zit. The sound filled the cabin. He worked steadily, his eyes fixed on the metal, trying not to look at the raw, bloody skin beneath it. She had fought this thing. She had fought it hard. When the iron finally snapped apart, he tossed the cuff into the wood box. He would melt it down later. He covered her with his blanket, then dragged his rocking chair close to the hearth. He poured himself a cup of the whiskey he'd used on her wound, sat and laid his shotgun across his lap. He did not sleep. He just sat and watched and listened to the woman's ragged breathing punctuate the silence of the canyon. She woke near dawn. It was not a gentle waking. It was a violent explosion. She gasped, her eyes flying open, and she scrambled off the cot, crab-walking backward until she hit the far wall. She landed in a heap, her hand flying to her wounded side, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. A stream of harsh, guttural words poured from her mouth. She was looking for the chains. Her eyes darted from her bare wrist to him, and the terror hardened, instantly, into a black, fathomless hate. She saw him, a white man, old, bearded, holding a gun, and she knew, with all the certainty of her pain, what he was: an enemy, a captor. Eli did not move from his chair. He did not raise the shotgun. He just kept his hands visible, one on the stock, one on his knee. "Easy," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Easy, now. You're safe." She spat at him. The word was a curse. She tried to stand, to find a weapon, but the movement sent a white-hot spear of pain through her. She cried out, clutching her side, and slid back down the wall, her breathing ragged. Eli stayed put. He knew fear. He knew what it looked like when it turned cornered and mean. He gestured, slowly, to the bandage on her side. "Wound," he said. He pointed to the tin cup with the bullet. "Lead. Took it out." She just stared, her black eyes following his every move, her body tensed like a rabbit's in a snare. This was going to take time. He turned, deliberately, and put the shotgun back on its rack. It was a risk, but a necessary one. He walked to the stove, his back to her. He could feel her watching him, could feel the sheer force of her will assessing him. Was he weak? Was he stupid? He busied himself making coffee, moving slowly. He took a tin mug, dipped it in the water bucket, and slid it across the floorboards toward her. It stopped a few feet from her moccasins. "Water," he said. He pointed to his mouth. "Agua." She watched the cup as if it were a coiled snake. He went back to his coffee, poured himself a cup, and returned to his chair. And he waited. The sun came up. Light filled the small cabin. Hours passed. The only sounds were the ticking of his clock and the sizzle of the coffee pot. Finally, thirst won. Her hand shot out, grabbed the cup, and she drank, her eyes never leaving him. She drained it in seconds. He nodded, as if to himself. He stood, retrieved the cup, and refilled it, placing it in the same spot. He cut a piece of stale bread and put it beside the cup. He pointed to himself. "Eli." She said nothing. He pointed to her. She glared. The silence stretched. Just when he thought she wouldn't speak, her voice came, dry as cottonwood leaves. "Naylin." It was a start. He let her rest. He went about his day. He fed Bolo, mucked the corral, checked his traps. He left the cabin door open. She could see him. Always, she could see he was alone. She could see he was not a soldier. When he came back inside at midday, she was sitting up on the cot, the blanket wrapped around her. She had not touched the bread. He made a thin broth from jerky and set it near her. He went back outside. When he returned at dusk, the bowl was empty. He sat in his chair, cleaning his rifle, the lantern light casting long shadows. "You heal up," he said, not looking at her. He spoke to the fire, as if it were his confidant. "Then you go." She watched him, her face unreadable. This ain't safe," he continued, his voice low. "I can't keep you. The land, it's not safe for either of us, especially not together." He finally looked at her. Her eyes flashed, but not with fear this time. It was something else. Contempt, maybe, or just a deep, weary understanding. Of course the white man would send her away. They always did. That night the riders came. Eli heard the hoofbeats long before they were close, a dull drumming in the canyon floor. He'd been half expecting it. He stood, grabbing his shotgun. He looked at Naylin. "Behind the curtain," he hissed, pointing to the small alcove where he stored his provisions. "And silent. Do not make a sound. Do not breathe." Her eyes widened, the fear returning. But she didn't hesitate. She slipped from the cot and vanished behind the heavy canvas divide, just as the riders pulled up outside, their horses snorting and stamping. "McRae!" a voice barked. Eli stepped into the doorway, the shotgun held loose and low, but ready. "Evenin', Jebsen." There were 5 of them, silhouetted against a sliver of moon. Hard men, trail dirty, with the casual cruelty of men who ride for the government. "We're trackin'," Jebsen said, not bothering with pleasantries. He was a thick man with a tobacco-stained beard. "Lost an Apache girl, escaped transport up north, chained." Eli leaned against the doorframe. He could feel Naylin's presence behind him, like a cold spot in the room. "That's so," Eli said, his voice flat. "Ain't seen nothing but lizards and heat devils." "Heard she came this way, wounded." Another man chimed in. "You'd tell us, wouldn't you, McRae? After all, she's just a stray, but she's property, Army property." Eli let the silence sit for a moment. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust, just shy of Jebsen's horse. "Property runs off," Eli said. "Ain't my concern. I'm retired from hunting, be it men or women." Jebsen's eyes narrowed. He scanned the dark cabin behind Eli. He saw the single cot, the cold hearth, the chair. "You sure you're alone out here, old man? Awful empty." "I like it empty," Eli said. "Keeps the noise down." It was a standoff. The air was thick with violence. Eli knew these men. He knew if they suspected, for 1 second, they would burn his cabin to the ground with him in it. He didn't blink. He just waited. Jebsen finally tugged on his reins. "If you see her, you put a bullet in her. It's $5. "I'll keep it in mind," Eli said. "Good night, McRae." The posse wheeled their horses and trotted away, their curses and laughter fading into the canyon. Eli stayed in the doorway until the sound was completely gone. He waited another 10 minutes, just to be sure. He closed the door, dropped the heavy bar into place, and turned. Naylin was standing right behind the curtain, her knuckles white where she gripped the canvas. She had heard every word. She stared at him. Her face was a storm of confusion. This man was white. He was her enemy. He had lied to his own kind. He had protected her. It did not make sense. She didn't trust him. Trust was a luxury she'd never had. But for the first time since she'd woken, the hate in her eyes was mixed with something else, a dangerous, flickering curiosity. Eli said nothing. He didn't try to explain. He just went back to his chair, picked up his coffee cup, and found it was cold. He sat by the fire, long after Naylin had retreated to the cot. The confrontation had stirred up ghosts. The smell of the posse's dust and sweat. It reminded him. He wasn't always an old man raising horses. He'd worn the gray, down in Georgia, and watched the world burn. He hadn't fought for the cause. He'd fought because they pointed him and told him to shoot. And it was better than being shot himself. After, when the world was broke, he'd hunted men for paper. It was just killing for pay. It was simple. Until it wasn't. He remembered a raid in New Mexico, riding with men just like Jebson's, but meaner. They weren't law. They were just a hammer looking for a nail. They'd cornered a small band of mescalero, an old man, a young man, and a woman. The men, they'd grabbed the woman. Eli had just watched. He was tired. He was sick of the blood, the screaming. He was sick of being the animal they wanted him to be. But he didn't stop it. He just turned his back. The woman had looked at him just before they took her. She hadn't begged. She hadn't cried. She had just looked at him with an accusing stillness that had burned itself into his memory. He'd heard the shot as he rode away. He never collected the bounty. He'd ridden west until he hit this canyon, and he hadn't hunted a man since. He looked over at the cot. Naylin was asleep, her breathing shallow. He hadn't saved that woman. Now, here was another. He wasn't saving Naylin for redemption. He was too old for that. He was saving her because he'd already seen what happened when he turned his back, and he couldn't live through it twice. A few days passed. The wound on Naylin's side began to knit. The fever broke. She was on her feet. She moved like a shadow, restless and trapped. She wouldn't stay in the cabin. The first day she could stand, she slipped outside. Eli watched her from the doorway. He let her go. If she wanted to run, he wouldn't stop her. It would be safer for him. But she didn't run. She walked to the corral. His horses, Bolo and the two mares, watched her. Their ears pricked. She stood by the fence for nearly an hour, not moving. She just watched them. Then she whistled. It was a low, soft sound, like wind through a reed. Bolo, a grumpy, ill-tempered gelding who only tolerated Eli, actually walked over. He stretched his neck, sniffing her. Naylin didn't touch him. She just put her face close to his muzzle and breathed, her own breath warming his. Eli watched, his heart giving a strange, unfamiliar lurch. He saw her hands, scarred and delicate, rest on the rough wood of the fence. He saw the tension in her shoulders ease. Just for a moment, she belonged out here, under the wide-open sky, not in his dusty cabin. She was healing, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that the time was coming when he'd have to make her go. That night, the sky broke open. The desert storms were not gentle. They were sudden and violent. The sky, which had been a clear, bruised purple, turned black. A crack of lightning split the canyon, and the thunder that followed sounded like the mountains were tearing themselves apart. Rain came down in solid, driving sheets, hammering the tin roof of the cabin. Eli was used to it. He sat by the fire, mending a piece of harness, the rhythmic thwack of his awl a counterpoint to the storm. He heard her first, a muffled cry. From behind the curtain, a sound of struggle. Then she screamed. It was not a scream of pain. It was a sound of pure, bottomless terror. a sound from a place no human should have to go. Eli was on his feet in an instant, his knife in his hand. He tore the curtain back. She was on the cot, fighting the blankets, her eyes wide open but seeing nothing. She was crying out in her own tongue, her hands flailing, warding off blows he couldn't see. She was back there, back with the men who had chained her. "Nylan," he said, his voice rough. She gasped, scrambling away from his voice, falling off the cot and onto the floor. She bolted. She ran past him, into the main room, heading for the door, for escape. The rain was lashing so hard it was blowing in through the cracks in the door frame. She hit the door, fumbling for the bar, soaked in seconds from the spray. She was shaking, not from the cold. It was a tremor that started deep inside her, a memory shaking her bones. Eli stopped. He didn't know what to do. He was a man good at stopping bleeding, at setting traps, at ending fights. He was not a man built for this. He slowly, carefully, put the knife down on the table. He was wearing his old wool coat, the one he wore in winter. It was heavy, smelling of smoke and horse. He took it off. He stepped toward her. She flinched, pressing herself against the door. "Here," he said. He held it out. She stared at the fire, her breathing coming in broken, tearing sobs. Then her eyes snapped to his. He saw the woman, lost and drowning in the dark. She saw. He didn't know what she saw. Not the enemy, not the captor, just a man, an old man, holding a coat. He stepped forward and draped the heavy coat over her shoulders. It swallowed her. Their eyes held, a long, silent moment where the only sound was the storm. He saw the fight in her, the pride, the raw, wounded spirit. The thunder rolled away, rumbling down the canyon. The rain softened, settling into a steady, drumming rhythm. The terror left her. All at once, it drained away, leaving her hollow. She sagged, her knees buckling. She leaned. It was barely a movement. Her shoulder, covered in his coat, just brushed against his chest. It was the first time they had touched without violence or medicine between them. Eli stood rock still. He was afraid to breathe, afraid any movement would shatter the moment. Her hand, which had been fisted at her side, uncurled. It was shaking, gripping the lapel of his coat. His own hand, gnarled and scarred from a lifetime of rope burns and rains, moved. He didn't think about it. He just did it. He covered her hand with his. It wasn't a caress. It wasn't a gesture of ownership. It was an anchor, a simple, heavy weight. I am here. You are here. It is just the rain. She didn't pull away, and they stood there, in the dark cabin, the firelight flickering, listening to the world outside wash itself clean. The storm passed, leaving the air washed clean and sharp. The cabin, which had felt like a refuge, now felt like a cage. Nylan was healing. The bullet wound in her side was knitting closed, the deep purple bruise around it fading to a sickly yellow. But as her body mended, her spirit grew restless. She paced the small cabin, from the door to the hearth, her bare feet silent on the floorboards. She hated the cot. She hated the smell of stale smoke and old whiskey. Most of all, she hated the quiet gratitude Eli expected. He was a man of few words, but she saw it in the way he looked at her, the look of a man who had done a good deed and was waiting for it to be acknowledged. She wanted freedom. She did not want his pity. On the third morning after the storm, she walked out of the cabin at dawn. Eli was already by the corral, tossing hay to his 3 horses. He saw her and tensed, his hand stopping mid-throw. "You should be resting," he said. His voice was gravel. Nylan ignored him. She walked straight to the fence. The 2 mares watched her, their ears pricked forward. The young colt, a skittish bay, snorted and shied away. She studied them, her head tilted. "They are thin," she said. Eli bristled. "They get by. They need grooming. Their coats are full of burrs." "They're horses, not parlor dogs." She slipped between the fence rails, into the corral. Eli took a step forward. "Stay out of there! That colt'll kick you!" She did not even look at him. She walked slowly toward the colt, her hands held open and low. She was not looking at the horse. She was looking past it, as if watching something on the horizon. The colt stamped, nervous, then stillness. She began to hum, a low, repetitive sound that was nothing like a white man's song. It sounded like wind. She reached his side, and her hand, scarred and brown, touched the colt's neck. The horse shuddered, but did not move. Eli stood, mouth slightly open, the hay fork hanging useless in his hand. He had spent 3 months trying to get that colt to accept a bridle, and here she was, touching him as easy as breathing. Naylin turned her head. "A brush," she said. He stared. "A brush," she repeated, this time with a sharp edge. Grudgingly, Eli went to the shed and fetched the curry comb and brush. He handed them to her over the fence. She went to work, her movements economical and sure. She didn't use the comb's teeth, but the flat of it, rubbing in slow circles that the horses seemed to love. She spoke to them in her language, a series of soft clicks and murmurs. Eli leaned against the fence, his arms crossed, and watched. He was supposed to be the horseman. This was his land, his cabin, his life. But she moved as if the place belonged to her, as if the animals were hers. The colt, feeling the brush on his flank, suddenly kicked up his back legs, a playful, bucking leap that sent a cloud of dust into the morning air. Naylin stumbled back, and a sound startled Eli more than the horse. She was laughing. It was not a soft sound. It was sharp and sudden, like a dry stick breaking. It was the first time he had heard her make a sound that was not born of pain, fear, or anger. It was raw, and it was beautiful. It hit Eli squarely in the chest. A strange, warm ache. He felt his own lips twitch, the skin around his eyes crinkling in a way it hadn't in years. A smile. It felt foreign, like a suit of clothes that no longer fit. He turned away, coughing to cover the moment, and went back to his work, but he did not stop listening. They worked together for a week. They fell into a rhythm that did not require words. He mended harness. She oiled the leather. He chopped wood. She stacked it. He rode out to check his traps. She groomed the horses. The tension, however, did not ease. It coiled tighter. It was in the way he avoided looking at her for too long, and the way she seemed to feel his gaze even when his back was turned. It was the unspoken, electric current of two people who were not meant to be in the same space, forced together by circumstance and the shared memory of that night in the storm. It was a wire pulled taut by his guilt, her caution, and a desire that neither of them had a name for. One afternoon, they were resetting a loose post on the corral fence. Eli held the post steady while Naylin packed rocks and dirt around its base, tamping it down with a heavy piece of timber. She stopped, her hands on the tamper, her knuckles white. "Why?" she asked, not looking at him. Eli grunted. "Needs to be solid, or the mares will push it over." Not the fence. She straightened, turning to face him. The sun was hot on her back. Her eyes were sharp, like black obsidian. "Why did you help me?" Eli looked away, up at the canyon ridge. He had asked himself the same question. Because of the chains, because he was old, because he was a fool. "You were bleeding," he said. "Others have bled." Her voice was quiet, but it cut. "White men see my people bleed. They ride past, or they are the ones who make us bleed. You lied to the posse. You lied to your own." He had no answer for her. He could not tell her about the woman in New Mexico, the ghost that haunted him. He could not explain the shame he felt when he saw the broken link of that chain. To speak it would make it real, and he had spent a decade burying it. "Just did," he said, turning back to the post. "Hold it steady." She saw the evasion. She saw the wall he put up. Her lips tightened. She lifted the heavy timber and slammed it down into the dirt. The ground shuddered. Thud! He flinched. Thud! She was not tamping the dirt. She was hitting him, hitting the silence between them. Thud! The world intruded, as it always does. The creek that cut through the edge of Eli's land was the only water for 2 miles. He knew people used it. He usually kept to himself, but he needed supplies. He'd been putting off the ride to the small settlement, a collection of saloons, a general store, and a blacksmith, for days. I'm riding to town, he announced one morning. He was saddling Bolo. Bar the door. Don't light a fire. Don't go outside. For any reason. She watched him, her face impassive. You are afraid. I'm smart, he snapped. Them men, Jebson's men, they'll be back through, and there's others. Just stay inside. He rode off, his back stiff. The cabin was hot. The silence was heavy. Nayland lasted an hour. She could not stand the walls. She was Apache. Her home was the air, the wind, the sun. This box of wood and mud was a tomb. She needed water. She needed to feel the cool creek on her skin. She slipped out, staying low in the scrub brush, and made her way to the creek. It was a shaded, quiet place, lined with cottonwoods. She knelt, cupping the cold water to her face. She washed the dust from her arms, the wound on her side pulling, but no longer truly painful. She felt, for a moment, free. That was when she heard the sound, a boot slipping on shale. She looked up. A white boy, no more than 15, was standing on the opposite bank. He was thin, with watery blue eyes and a face full of freckles. He was holding a string of rabbits. It was Billy Carver. They stared at each other. Billy had never seen an Apache woman up close, not one who wasn't in chains or dead. He had only heard stories. He saw the black hair, the dark eyes, the scar on her arm. Nayland saw the fear in his face. It was the same fear the colt had shown, but this was not an animal. This was a white boy. This was danger. Billy dropped the rabbits. He turned and ran, scrambling up the bank, crashing through the brush, yelling for a father who wasn't there. Nayland's blood ran cold. She knew what this meant. She knew what a boy's fear could do. She fled back to the cabin, her heart pounding against her ribs, the illusion of freedom gone. When Eli returned, he didn't even have time to unsaddle his horse. She was standing in the doorway, her face taut. "A boy," she said, "by the creek. He saw me." Eli closed his eyes. He let out a long breath, a string of curses under his voice. "Billy Carver," he said. It wasn't a question. "His pa's the loudest mouth in the territory, a drunk, hates everything." He looked at her, and the fragile peace of the last week was shattered. The world was at their door. "You gotta go," he said, his voice flat and hard. "Tonight, soon as it's dark." He went inside, past her. He pulled a flour sack from a hook and began filling it with jerky, a handful of bullets for the rifle he'd given her, and a small twist of salt. Nayland followed him. She watched him pack. "Where?" she said, her voice shaking with a sudden, cold fury. "North," he said, not looking at her. "Follow the dry wash. It'll take you to the high country. They won't look for you there, not in winter." He pushed the sack into her hands. He gave her his best canteen. She stood there, holding his offerings. Then, with a cry of rage, she threw the sack at his feet. The jerky spilled across the floor. "No!" she screamed. "You are like all of them." Eli recoiled, shocked by her sudden violence. You pull me from the ground. You clean my wound. You watch me." Her voice broke. "And now there is trouble. So you send me away, like a dog you are tired of, like every white man who takes what he wants and then sends away." "That ain't fair," Eli said, his voice rising. "I'm trying to keep you alive." You are trying to keep you alive, she shot back. You are afraid of them. Afraid of Jebsen. Afraid of this Carver. You are afraid of me. He flinched, because it was true, all of it. They will hang me, Nalin, he said, his voice low and dangerous. They will hang me for harboring you, and what they do to you, it'll be worse than hanging. You want to die? I am not afraid to die, she said, her chest heaving. I am afraid of this pity, this using. The argument ended. There was nothing left to say. The cabin was thick with bitterness, the smell of spilled salt and broken trust. Eli expected her to run. He expected her to grab the supplies and vanish into the dusk. He sat in his chair, cleaning a shotgun he had just cleaned yesterday. He waited. The sun went down. The cabin grew dark. He didn't light the lantern. He heard her move. Not to the door. She went to the cot and sat down. He woke hours later, his neck stiff from the chair. The moon was high, casting a pale, dead light through the window. He looked at the cot. She was still there, awake. Her silhouette was bolt upright, staring at the cold hearth. She had not left, and he did not ask her again. The next day was a torment. They were prisoners together, waiting for a knock that didn't come. The silence was heavier than the storm. They were two statues in a tomb. That evening, Eli sat by the fire, poking at the flames with a stick. He had to say something. He had to explain the thing he couldn't explain. I ain't like them, he said, his voice halting. He was speaking to the fire. I don't hate. She said nothing. There was a woman, he said, the words tasting like ash. Years ago, after the war, I was hunting for bounty. He told her about the raid, the Mescalero woman, the way her eyes had looked at him, the way he had turned his back. I didn't stop it, he whispered. I just rode off. I let her die. He finally turned to look at Nalin, who was watching him, her face a mask. I see her, he said, his voice rough with a confession he hadn't known he was making. Sometimes, when I look at you, maybe that's why I helped. Maybe you just remind me of her. He offered the words as a peace, a truth. But it was the wrong truth. Nalin stood up. Her movement was slow, deliberate. The air around her turned to ice. I am not a ghost, she said, her voice a low, vibrating wire of steel. He looked at her, confused. My name, she said, is Nalin. I am not her. She stepped closer. I am not your shame. I am not your penance. You did not save me. You just pulled me from the dirt. She stared at him, her eyes filled with a new, burning clarity. He had not seen her. He had only seen a reflection of his own sin. I am not her, she repeated, and she walked out of the cabin, slamming the door so hard the tin cup on the table rattled. Eli sat, stunned. He had tried to be honest, and he had wounded her more deeply than the bullet had. He let her go. The sun was setting, painting the cliffs a deep, bloody red. He thought, she'll go north now. She'll run. And he felt a cold, hollow emptiness open in his chest. But an hour later, she had not returned. The dusk was turning to a deep, cold purple. He went looking for her. He told himself it was to give her the rifle, but he knew it was a lie. He found her at the creek. The moon was rising, a pale sliver, but the light was bright in the canyon. She was in the water, a dark shape against the silver ripples. She was bathing, washing away the cabin, the day, his words. He stopped, hidden by the thicket of cottonwoods. He should have turned. He should have made a sound, announced himself. He should have left. He did none of those things. He stood, and he watched. He saw her silhouette, the curve of her shoulders, the line of her back. She dipped her head, her long, black hair fanning out in the water. She rose, and the moonlight caught the beads of water on her skin. He felt a profound, aching longing that he had not felt in 30 years. It was not just the desire of a lonely old man. It was her. It was Nalin. Her pride, her anger, her laughter over the colt. He didn't know what he wanted. He was ashamed. He was an old man, a watcher, a ghost himself. He was no better than the men who had looked at her like property. He stepped back, and a dry twig snapped under his boot. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet. Nalin froze. Her head whipped toward the trees. She saw his shape, dark against the lighter brush. Eli turned and crashed his way back to the cabin, his heart pounding like a trapped bird. He felt sick. He was a thief. He was at the hearth when she returned, his back to the door. He was stirring a pot of beans, his hands shaking. He didn't know she was there until she spoke. "I saw you." Her voice was quiet, not angry, just a fact. Eli froze. The spoon stopped moving. I'm sorry," he mumbled, still facing the fire. "I didn't mean, no disrespect. I was just checking to see you were safe." It was a weak, stupid lie. He heard her walk closer. He finally got the courage to turn. She was standing in the middle of the room, wrapped in his blanket, her damp hair clinging to her neck. The firelight flickered across her face. "I want to be looked at," she said. His mouth fell open. He did not understand. "Those men," she said, her voice low. "Jepson, the men who chained me, they looked, but they did not see me. They saw a thing, an animal." She took a step closer. She was right in front of him now. "And you," she said, her eyes searching his. "Tonight, at the creek, you looked, but you were afraid." He couldn't speak. She was right. He was afraid of what he wanted. "I am not a ghost," she whispered, "and I am not a thing." She was reclaiming the moment. She was taking the shame he felt and erasing it. This was her choice. She reached out and took his hand, his rough, calloused, trembling hand. She guided it, placing it on her waist, under the blanket, against the warm skin of her side. He gasped, a short, sharp intake of breath. The firelight danced. He could feel the small, hard ridge of the scar from his own stitching. "Take me now, old cowboy," she whispered. The words were raw, desperate. It was not a plea for love. It was a demand for life, a way to prove they were both still human, still breathing, in a world that wanted them dead. He trembled. He looked into her eyes, and he saw no ghost. He saw only Nalin. He leaned in, or perhaps she pulled him down. Their mouths met. It was not a gentle kiss. It was urgent, trembling, and full of a terrible shared ache. It tasted of salt and wood smoke and the dust of the trail. It was a drowning man's first breath. He gripped her waist, pulling her close, his shame and his loneliness and his guilt all burning away in the sudden, shocking heat. Then, just as quickly, he broke away. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was shaking. "Not like this," he whispered. His voice was broken. She looked at him, her eyes wide, her lips parted. Not when you're hurting," he said. He meant her soul. He meant her memory of those men. He meant his own ghosts. It was the last, ragged piece of honor he owned. He would not be another man who took. Nalin stepped back. The connection was broken. The firelight flickered between them. Her eyes were not soft. They were burning. They were not angry, but filled with a terrible, stark clarity. She knew what he was. He was a coward, afraid to live. "Then when?" she asked. The question hung in the air, cold and sharp as a knife. When would they not be hurting? When would the world not be hunting them? Eli had no answer. The word hung in the air between them, sharp and unanswered. When? Tension, which had been a live wire, became a heavy, suffocating blanket. The morning after, the cabin was a tomb. Nayland's question lay on the floor like a broken dish, and neither of them knew how to sweep up the pieces. They worked. It was all they had. They moved around each other in a grim, silent dance. He would fetch water. She would already have the fire going. She would mend one of his torn shirts, her stitches small and tight. He would sit outside, cleaning his rifle. The shk-shk-shk of the oiled rag, the only sound for an hour. The desire that had flared between them did not die. It banked, like coals under ash. A dangerous, simmering heat that both of them were terrified to touch. He watched her hands as she ground coffee. She watched his back as he chopped wood, the muscles in his old shoulders still powerful. They ate in silence, the scrape of a spoon against a tin bowl deafening. It was a miserable, bristling quiet, pregnant with the things they had almost done, and the things they could not say. He had pulled back, and in doing so, he had confirmed her deepest fear. He was a man who would always, in the end, retreat. The standoff lasted 2 days. On the third afternoon, the world came knocking. Eli was re-shoeing Bolo. The gelding's hoof held firm between his knees. Nayland was inside, out of sight. He heard the rider before he saw him, a sloppy, uneven canter that meant the man was either drunk or a fool. It turned out to be both. A large, greasy man on a sweat-lathered horse pulled up just shy of the corral. He wore a stained duster, and his face was a map of broken veins, puffy and red from drink. He had a shotgun resting across his saddle pommel. "It was Mr. Carver McRae," Carver slurred, spitting a brown stream of tobacco juice that landed too close to Eli's boot. Eli did not look up. He kept filing the hoof. "Carver, just checking on my neighbors." Carver's voice was too loud, too friendly. "Funny thing, my boy, Billy, he was down by the creek a few days back, chasing rabbits." Eli kept filing. "That's so." "Yeah, that is so." Carver leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial wheeze. "He says he saw something that didn't belong." The file stopped. Sst. The silence that followed was cold. Eli slowly lowered Bolo's hoof and straightened up, his back cracking. He turned, his face as blank and hard as a piece of granite. "Your boy sees a lot of things. Last I heard, he saw a ghost bear up on the ridge." Carver's fake smile faltered. "This wasn't no bear. He said it was a girl, a native girl, down by your water." Eli wiped his hands on his canvas trousers. He walked slowly to the fence, stopping just a few feet from Carver's horse. He was smaller than Carver, but something in his stillness made the larger man shift in his saddle. "A girl," Eli repeated, his voice flat. "That's right. Now, I know you. McRae, I know you like being alone. But harboring, well, that's a dangerous thing. That's a hanging thing. We got laws in this territory." "I know the law," Eli said. "I also know a drunk, loud-mouthed fool when I see one. You're trespassing. Carver, you and that worn-out nag." Carver's face purpled. "You calling me a liar?" "I'm calling you drunk. Your boy saw a shadow and his own fear. There's nothing here but me and my horses. Now, get off my land, before I forget my good manners." Eli's hand was not on his gun. It was resting on the fence post, but his eyes were a different story. They were old and tired, and they promised a world of trouble. Carver looked past him. At the cabin, the door was shut. The curtains were drawn. He saw the cold chimney. "Someone's helping him," Carver muttered, more to himself than to Eli. "The Army's lost 6 runaways this season. Someone's aiding them, and it makes folks nervous." "Let 'em be nervous," Eli said. "Just don't be nervous here." Carver stared at him for a long, ugly moment. He knew Eli's reputation, knew he'd been a bounty man, knew he was not to be pushed lightly, but the suspicion was planted. A nasty seed infertile, drunken ground. You watch yourself, old man. Carver snarled. He wrenched his horse's head around. You watch yourself close. He kicked the horse into a clumsy gallop and disappeared down the trail. Eli watched him go until the dust settled. He turned and walked to the cabin. He pushed the door open. Naylin was standing by the cold hearth, her entire body vibrating. She had heard it all. "He will come back," she said. Her voice was flat, all the life gone from it. "He's a drunk," Eli said, walking to the water bucket. "His talk is big, but he's mostly wind." "He will come back," she repeated. "With other men like Jebsen, men like the ones who chained me." She was right. He knew it. "I have to go," she said. She walked to the cot and picked up the sack he had packed for her days before. "No." The word was out of his mouth before he could think. She looked at him, confused. "He said it. They will hang you, for me. I will not be the rope around your neck." "I said no." He took the sack from her hand and tossed it on the table. "You're not running, not wounded, not with men like that hunting." "And you will stop them?" Her voice was bitter. "You, the old man who is afraid to even look at me. You will fight Apache for me." "I ain't afraid of them," he said, his own anger rising. "No, you are afraid of this." She gestured between them, at the cabin, at the cot. "You are afraid to live, so you will die. For what? For a ghost, for the woman you let die." "This ain't about her," he roared, and the force of his own voice shocked him. "This ain't about anything but that drunken bastard Carver, and a world that likes putting chains on people. I told you, I'm tired. I'm tired of running. I'm tired of letting men like him win." "This is not your fight, Eli." "He came on my land. He threatened me in my own home. He made it my fight." She stared at him, her chest heaving. She saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Not just guilt, not just desire. It was a stubborn, rooted thing. It was pride. "I do not belong here," she whispered, the fight draining out of her. I am what they hunt. I bring this to you." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "And you think I belong here? You think they like me in that town? I'm the crazy old man in the canyon, the Confederate trash, the bounty hunter who quit. I don't belong here any more than you do. Naylin." The admission hung in the air. He had said her name. He had put them on the same side. "We are just here," he said, his voice heavy with weariness. "And I'm not letting anyone take you again." She didn't have an answer for that. The next day, the cabin was unlivable. The argument, the threat, the unspoken desire, it was all too much for the small space. "Saddle the mare," Eli said at dawn. "The one you like." "Why?" "We need meat, and we need to get out of this box." They rode out, Eli on Bolo, Naylin on the younger mare, her rifle in a scabbard by her knee. She rode with an easy grace that Eli envied, as if she were part of the horse. They left the canyon floor and climbed into the high, rocky hills. The air was thinner here and cleaner. The world opened up, a vast expanse of red rock, blue sky, and dotted green scrub. The silence was different. It was not the heavy, angry silence of the cabin. It was the vast, breathing silence of the land. Naylin changed. The hunted, cornered look fell away from her. She sat straighter in the saddle. She breathed deeper. She reined in her horse on a high mesa. "Stop," she said. Eli stopped. "Listen," she commanded. He listened. He heard a hawk cry. High above, he heard the wind whistling through a crack in a pinnacle of rock. "The wind," she said. "It tells you rain is coming. 2 days. From the north. You feel it?" He just felt wind. "And look," she said, pointing not at the ground, but at the sky. "The hawks, they hunt high. It means the snakes and rabbits are moving. They feel the change. We hunt. There." She pointed to a shadowed fold in the hills. She was the teacher now. He was the student. She showed him how her people read the land. She pointed out a plant he'd always thought was a weed. The root, boiled, she said, draws the poison from a snake bite. She showed him how to find water by watching the line of the cottonwoods, how to tell an old trail from a new one by the way the small stones were scattered. He had lived here for 10 years, and he realized he had seen none of it. He had just existed, walled in by his own ghosts. She lived here, even as a prisoner. As the afternoon light softened, they sat on a high ledge, the horses grazing behind them. They had a rabbit, dressed and tied to Nalen's saddle. The view was endless. "You are good at this," Eli said quietly. "The land, you belong to it." "It belongs to us," she said. "It does not judge. It just is. It kills you, or it feeds you. It is honest. Not like towns, not like men." The peace of the day opened something in him. The confession he'd made about the Mescalero woman had been for him. This one was for her. "I had a wife, once," he said. Nalen turned, her face surprised. He had never offered anything of himself. Not really. Her name was Sarah, long time ago, before the war. He picked up a small, sharp rock, turning it over and over in his calloused fingers. "We had a small farm. In Tennessee, it was quiet. Good land." He stopped, the memory thick in his throat. "The war came," he continued, his voice flat. "I didn't want to go, but they made you choose. I went. I was a scout, good at what you do, reading trails, good at killing. I was gone 4 years. When I got back, there was nothing, just burned timber and weeds. The farm was gone." "And her?" Nalen asked, her voice soft. "Gone." He stared at the stone in his hand. "Neighbor told me. It was a raid, not soldiers, just men, deserters. They burned everything. She was in the house." He did not have to say more. "I left," he said, his voice hard, killing the memory. "I never went back. I came west. I hunted men, 'cause it was all I was good for. I hunted 'em till I saw that woman, the one I told you about, and I couldn't do it no more. I came here to wait." He had bared the rotten, hollow core of himself, the guilt, the loss, the emptiness. Nalen was quiet for a long time. The wind picked up, cool against their faces. "My sister," she said, her voice so low he barely heard it. He looked at her. Her name was Ahawi. It means she laughs, and she did, all the time. Nalen smiled. A faint, heartbreaking expression. She was younger. She was soft. She loved the color blue. She was to be married. We were taken, not by soldiers, by white men, slavers, they call them. They were taking us to sell, to the mines, south." She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "They separated us. At the Fort Apache. They sold her. I fought. I bit a man. I nearly tore his eye out." She touched the raw, scarred skin on her wrist, where the manacle had been. "They chained me. For that, they were taking me to the reservation, to be punished, to be tamed. I never saw her again," she whispered. "I was running, trying to get back to the fort, trying to find her, when they shot me, and I found your fence." She looked at him, and for the first time her eyes were not angry or afraid. They were just full of a pain that matched his own. They were two sides of the same broken coin. He had lost his love to a raid. She had lost her sister to a sale, both victims of the same casual, brutal greed that ruled the land. Their pain bound them. It was a chain stronger than iron. The sun began to dip, setting the sky on fire. The rocks around them glowed a deep, aching crimson. Eli looked at her, and he did not see a ghost. He did not see a stranger. He saw Nalin. He saw her sister's laughter and her own strength. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly. He didn't touch her waist. He touched her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For her sister, for his wife, for all of it." She leaned into his touch. "I am sorry," she said. He leaned in. She met him halfway. They kissed. It was not the desperate, angry clash in the cabin. It was slow. It was deep. It was full of a need that had been simmering for weeks, a need that was now built on more than just loneliness. It was built on shared ground, on confessions, on the raw, honest pain of two survivors. It was a kiss of profound, aching tenderness. It was a promise. They rode back in the twilight, not speaking. They didn't need to. When they got to the cabin, he unsaddled the horses while she took the rabbit inside. He barred the door. The small room felt different. It was not a cage. It was a shelter. She was by the fire, seasoning the meat. He came and stood behind her. He put his hands on her shoulders. She leaned back against him, her head resting on his chest. He could feel the steady beat of her heart. Or maybe it was his own. He turned her around. He kissed her again, in the warm firelight. He kissed her eyelids, her scarred hands. She unwrapped the blanket she wore, and he untucked his shirt. This was not a taking. It was a giving. They lay on his cot, by the fire. Their lovemaking was intense, a quiet, desperate exploration. It was the touch of two souls who had been starved for kindness. It was the feel of skin against skin, a confirmation of life in the face post of so much death. It was full of an aching, desperate tenderness, a way to heal the wounds that words could not reach. Afterward, they lay tangled in the blanket, the firelight playing over them. The cabin was warm and safe, and for the first time, it felt like a home. Eli was almost asleep, his arm heavy across her stomach, when she whispered into the darkness. "I am afraid," she said. He tensed. "Carver?" "No." She turned, propping herself on her elbow to look at him. Her hair fell across his chest. "I am afraid this is a dream, that I will wake up, and you will be the old man in the chair again. That when the trouble comes, you will send me away, like you tried to." Eli looked at her. He saw the fear in her eyes, the very real terror of a happiness so fragile it could be blown away like ash. He had no words. He could not promise her a future. He could not promise her safety. He could not promise her that he was a better man than he had been. He had no lies left in him. So he said nothing. Instead, he pulled her down. He wrapped his arms around her, so tight she could barely breathe. He held her, his hand tangled in her hair, his face buried in her neck. He held her as if he could, by force of will alone, absorb her into his own skin, keep her safe from the Carvers and the ghosts and the world. He held her tighter, and he did not let go, all through the night. Far away, in the lantern-lit smoke of the settlement's only saloon, Carver was buying a round of whiskey. His voice was loud, full of drunken righteousness. "Swear on my boy's life. I seen the sign. McRae's got one of 'em. Hiding her. Right under our noses." "McRae's mean," one man muttered. "He's old." Carver spat. "And he's a traitor. Always was. Aiding a savage. That's a sickness. It's an insult to decent folk." He had an audience. Men with nothing better to do. Men who felt the same simmering resentment. Who feared the land and the people who truly knew it. "I say we ride out," Carver declared, slamming his glass on the bar. "I say we form a posse, a citizens' posse, and we go see for ourselves, and we'll need someone who can read the truth." He looked into the dark corner of the saloon, at a quiet, brooding man who rarely spoke, A man who drank alone. A man from a tribe to the north, who tracked for the army for money and whiskey. What about you, Joseph? Carver called. You want to earn a bottle? You want to find a runaway? The tracker, Joseph, looked up, his eyes empty. He nodded. Once. The noose was tightening. The next morning, Eli rose before dawn. He left Nalin sleeping, a softness on her face he had never seen before. He took his rifle and climbed the high ridge above his cabin. It was a habit, born of war. You always checked the high ground. The sun was just beginning to touch the eastern rim. The air was cold and clear. He looked north, toward the high country, and saw nothing. He looked east, toward the settlement, and he saw it. It was miles away, but unmistakable. A rising plume of alkali dust, pale gold in the new light. It was not a single rider. It was too much dust for that. It was 5 men, maybe 6. They were coming. He stood on the ridge, the cold wind whipping his hair, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He knew exactly what it meant. He was down from the ridge and crashing through his own cabin door before the sun had fully cleared the eastern rock. The light, golden and new, felt like a judgment. Nalin was awake, sitting on the cot, the blanket pooled around her waist. She was looking at her hands, a small, soft smile on her face, still wrapped in the memory of the night. When she heard him, her head snapped up. The smile vanished, replaced by the old, familiar wariness. Eli? Get up, he said. The voice was not his. It was the voice of the scout, the bounty hunter. A voice scraped clean of all feeling. Get your moccasins, now! What is it? What did you see? Posse, 6 men, coming fast. She was on her feet in an instant, the blanket dropping. She was a warrior again. How long? An hour, maybe less. They've got a tracker. He was already moving, his actions precise, economical. He grabbed a flour sack and shoved a wedge of jerky into it, a handful of dried figs, and a full skin of water. He checked his rifle, then tossed it, along with a box of cartridges, onto the cot. Take these, he said. Nalin grabbed the rifle, her eyes dark. I am not hiding. Eli, I will fight with you. Do not be a fool, he snapped, shoving the supplies into her arms. You fight, you die. They hang me, and they take you. That is not a fight. That is an ending. My ending, not yours. We can ride, she insisted, her voice desperate. We can take the horses. We can make for the high country. They've got a tracker, he repeated. They'd run us down by noon. You'd be on a tired mare, and I'm an old man. No, this is the only way. He grabbed her arm, harder than he intended, and pulled her toward the door. Come on, there's a place I know. He half dragged, half led her out of the cabin and into the gray morning light. He did not take the trail. He cut straight up the rocky hillside, into a narrow fissure that looked like a dead end. He moved with a speed that belied his age, his boots finding purchase on the familiar stone. Where are we going? She panted, climbing behind him. Place I used during the war, he said, not looking back. A hole, to wait out patrols. After a 5-minute climb that left them both breathless, they reached a shadowed ledge, hidden by a curtain of ancient, dry brush. Eli pulled it aside. Behind it was a dark slit in the rock, a cave. He pushed her inside. It was not a large space. It was a cold stone womb, smelling of damp earth and old, dead fires. It went back about 20 feet, deep enough to hide from the light, shallow enough to feel like a trap. Stay here, he said. In the back. Do not move. Do not make a sound. He put the supplies on the dusty floor. He saw her looking at a small, wooden crate in the corner, stenciled with a warning. That's dynamite, he said, answering her unspoken question. For a well I was digging, do not touch it. It's old, unstable. She ignored the box. She grabbed the front of his shirt, her knuckles white. Do not do this, Eli. Do not leave me. I will not be the one who hides while you die. I told you, I am not a ghost. I am not her. You are right, he said, his voice raw. He put his hands on her shoulders. You are not that woman. She died because I was a coward. I ran. I am not running now. This is not strength. This is sacrifice. This, he said, is buying time. Your time. He looked at her, at the fire in her eyes, the sheer, unbroken strength. The tenderness of the night before rushed back, and it was a terrible, sharp pain in his chest. He could not leave her like this. He pulled her to him and kissed her. It was not the slow, tender kiss of the sunset. It was hard and desperate. It was a brand. It tasted of fear and salt and a final, terrible goodbye. He poured every last thing he felt for her into it. The ache, the regret, the longing, the deep, burning respect. He broke away, his breath ragged. He pressed his forehead to hers. 2 days, he whispered, his voice shaking. You wait here for 2 days. Do not leave. Do not light a fire. If I am not back by the second sunset, you run. You take the high trail north. You run, and you do not look back. Do you hear me? You do not look back. Eli, she wept, the sound torn from her. Promise me, Nylon, swear it, or my dying is for nothing. She stared at him, her heart breaking. She saw the set of his jaw. He was an old, stubborn rock, and he would not be moved. I promise, she whispered, and she hated the word. He nodded, once. He gave her one last, hard look, as if memorizing her face. Then he turned, pushed aside the brush, and was gone. Nalin was left alone, in the cold, silent dark, clutching a rifle that was useless. Eli got back to the cabin just as the dust cloud became 6 distinct riders. He did not run. He walked, deliberately, to the small fire pit he used for coffee, and he used a precious match to light it. He grabbed his tin pot and began to make coffee. He heard them pull up, the jingle of harness, the snort of tired horses. He did not turn. He just poured water into the pot. That's far enough, Carver, he said, his voice calm. McRae! Carver's voice was full of a gloating, drunken power. He dismounted, along with 4 other men. They were settlers, farmers, hard-looking men caught up in Carver's righteous anger. The 6th man, however, stayed on his horse. He was an Apache tracker, his face empty, his eyes missing nothing. This was the man Eli feared. Got some coffee on, Eli said, squinting at the pot. If you ain't in a hurry. We're in a hurry, Carver snarled. Where is she, old man? Eli finally turned, a tin mug in his hand. He looked at Carver with a mild, pitying curiosity. Where's who, Carver? Your wife run off again? I told you, she ain't here. One of the men laughed, a short, nervous bark. Do not play games with me, Carver said, his hand dropping to his pistol. My boy saw her. We know you got a native girl hid here. We know you've been harboring her. Eli sighed, as if bored. Your boy saw a coyote. Or maybe he was just drunk, like his PA. There's no one here. Hasn't been for 10 years. Just me. He's lying, one of the men said, looking around. It's too quiet. Joseph, Carver commanded. Go look. Find her sign. The tracker, Joseph, slid off his horse. He did not look at Eli. He walked, not to the cabin, but to the corral. He knelt by the water trough. Then he moved, slow and methodical, toward the creek. Eli's heart was a cold stone. He had been so careful with Nullen, but he hadn't been careful enough with himself. You're a fool, Carver, Eli said, turning his back on them to face the fire. He was trying to provoke him, to keep the attention on himself. Riding all the way out here on a boy's bad dream, You're wasting daylight." "We'll see," Carver said, his voice tight. They waited. The only sound was the bubbling of the coffee pot and the wind. After 5 minutes, Joseph returned. He stopped in front of Carver and held out his hand. In his palm was a single, long black hair, pulled from a burr on the corral fence. "She was here," Joseph said, his voice flat, "brushing the horses 2, maybe 3 days ago, and—" he pointed to the cabin. "He's been cooking for 2, not 1. I smell it on the air." Carver's face lit up with a terrible, righteous joy. "I knew it." He advanced on Eli. "Where is she? You traitor!" Eli took a sip of his coffee. "Gone." "Liar." "She was here," Eli said, his voice weary. "She was hurt. I patched her up. She left 3 days ago, headed south." He was lying, trying to send them the wrong way. Carver's eyes narrowed. "He's stalling. She's here. She's in the cabin." "Then look," Eli said, shrugging. "You'll just find my mess." Carver gestured with his shotgun. "Tear it apart." The men needed no other encouragement. They kicked in the cabin door and descended like locusts. They were not searching. They were destroying. They overturned his table, shattered his 2 chairs. They ripped the blanket, the one Nolan had slept in, the one they had shared, off the cot and tore it with their knives. Eli watched, his face impassive, his gut twisting. "She ain't here! Carver!" one man yelled from inside. "Check the shed!" Carver roared. "Check the root cellar!" They found nothing, just tools and grain. Carver came back out, his face a dark red. He was furious. He had been promised a prize, and Eli had hidden it. "He's lying," Carver spat. "He helped her. He aided a savage. That's against the law." "It's my land. Carver," Eli said, his voice low. "I'll help who I damn well please. Now get off it." You Confederate trash." Carver snarled. He grabbed Eli by the shirt and threw him to the ground. "You think you're better than us?" Eli landed hard, the coffee mug scattering. He looked up at Carver, and he let a small, pitying smile touch his lips. "I think you're a sad, drunken bully, Carver, and you can't even find one woman. You're pathetic." It was the final provocation. Carver bellowed and kicked him. He kicked him in the ribs, hard. Eli grunted, curling into himself. The other men joined in. They beat him. They beat him with their fists, their boots. Eli did not fight back. He just protected his head, his body, and he endured. This was the payment. This was the time he was buying. Finally, Carver, winded and sweating, stepped back. Eli was a mass of blood and dust. "Burn the shed," Carver panted. "Burn it all." "No!" Eli tried to stand, but a boot knocked him back down. They lit torches and threw them into the dry wood of his small shed. It went up in a whoosh of flame. His tools, his saddles, his winter hay, everything. "Now," Carver said, pulling a set of heavy iron chains from his saddlebag. "Let's see how you like it." They chained his hands behind his back and dragged him to his feet. "Eli McRae," Carver announced to the wind, "I'm arresting you for harboring a fugitive and obstructing justice. We're taking you to town." They looped the chain around Carver's saddle horn, forcing Eli to walk. Stumbling, behind the horse, he was dragged away from his burning, ransacked home, a prisoner. From the high, cold darkness of the cave, Nayland saw it all. She saw the men. She saw them destroy the cabin. She could not hear the words, but she saw the beating. She saw Eli fall. She saw him not get up. And then she saw the smoke, thick, black, oily smoke. Not the cabin, the shed. Her hand flew to her mouth, a sob catching in her throat. His life, his horse's feed, his tools, they were burning his life to the ground because of her. She watched them drag him away, a chained figure stumbling in the dust cloud of the horses. She stayed. The promise. She had promised. The rest of that day was the longest of her life. She sat in the dark, staring at the patch of bright, indifferent blue sky at the cave's mouth. She clutched the rifle. Every instinct, every fiber of her being, screamed at her to run, to follow, to kill them. But she had promised 2 days. She waited. The sun crossed the sky, a hot, slow torment. It set the first sunset. One day, she did not sleep. She sat, cleaning the rifle over and over. She counted her bullets. She thought. She planned. She was a hunter, and she was planning her hunt. The second day, she felt the wind shift, the north wind. Just as she had predicted. A storm was coming. Good, the land would help her. The sun, that terrible slow-moving eye, began to dip again. The second sunset. The promise was fulfilled. She did not run north. She gathered her supplies. She took the water skin, the jerky, and the rifle, and she looked at the wooden box in the corner. Dynamite. She did not know how to use it. Not really, but she had seen the white men. She had seen the railroad crews blasting through the mountains. She knew what it did. She knew it meant opening. She took 2 sticks, the waxy paper-wrapped cylinders heavy in her hand. She took a coil of fuse and a box of matches. She moved out of the cave, a shadow in the twilight. She went to the hidden hollow where Eli kept his horses pastured. Bolo and the 2 mares, spooked by the fire, were huddled together. She whistled. The low, reedy sound Eli had admired. Bolo, the grumpy gelding, came to her. She bridled him, and the mare. She tied the mare to a tree. She would come back for her. She swung onto Bolo's back, riding bareback, the rifle across her lap, and turned the horse's head toward the town. The settlement was 20 miles of hard riding. She rode through the night, the wind rising, cold and sharp, at her back. She arrived an hour before dawn. The town was one main street, ankle-deep in mud and refuse. 2 saloons were still spilling yellow light, the sound of a tinny piano and drunken shouting cutting the night. She left Bolo in a dark alley between the general store and the blacksmith, hidden in the deep shadows. She pulled her blanket over her head, draping it to hide her face and hair. In the dark, she could pass for a Mexican woman, a saloon girl heading home late, or just another shadow. She knew where the jail was. It was always the strongest, meanest-looking building, a small, square box of new, ugly red brick. She slid along the wall, staying in the dark. She could hear voices. Just an old, crazy traitor. A voice slurred. It was Carver. He was in the jailhouse, drinking with the deputy. He'll hang. They'll make an example of him. Then she heard another sound. A low, racking cough. A groan of pain. Eli. She moved to the side of the building. To the alley, there was a single, barred window. Set high. She was too short. She found a rotten rain barrel, dragged it under the window, and carefully stood on it. She peered inside. She saw him. He was chained to the far wall, sitting on the dirt floor. His face was a swollen, bloody mess. One eye was closed. He was alive, but just barely. At that moment, the door to the jailhouse office scraped open. A man stumbled out into the alley, fumbling with his trousers. A deputy. He was drunk, his gun belt hanging low. He saw her dark shape on the barrel. "Well, now," he slurred, a grin splitting his face. "What have we got here? You lost Chiquita? Looking for some business?" He grabbed her, his hand fumbling for her blanket, pulling it away. He saw her face. His grin faltered, replaced by a drunk, ugly confusion. You're that..." He was too drunk to think. He lunged, trying to grab her. Naylin did not hesitate. She had promised herself she would never be grabbed again. She brought her knee up, hard, into his gut. He doubled over with a grunt. As he fell, She grabbed a loose piece of firewood stacked against the wall and brought it down, with all her strength, on the back of his head. He collapsed into the mud, unconscious, his keys jingling. She ignored him. She went back to the window. Eli had heard the scuffle. He was looking up, his one good eye wide. He saw her face, framed in the moonlight. He thought he was dreaming. He thought the fever from the beating had finally taken him. "Naylin?" "I am here," she whispered. His face broke. It was a terrible sight. Shame and horror and a pain deeper than the beating. He thought she had been caught. He thought he had failed. "Naylin, God," he murmured, his voice a dry rasp. I shouldn't have let you go." She pressed her face against the cold iron bars, her fingers gripping them. "I told you," she whispered, her voice fierce and shaking. "I am not a ghost." He stared at her, and in his one good eye, he finally understood. She was not a victim. She was not his shame. She was his rescuer. "The wall," she said, her voice urgent. "The back wall? It is brick, but old. The mortar is weak." "Naylin, no," he said. "Get out of here. Run. Run north. You promised." "I promised to wait 2 days." She said, "I waited." She pulled away from the window. "I am coming back tomorrow night, when the storm hits." She vanished into the darkness. She rode Bolo back to the cave system, her mind a cold, sharp piece of ice. She gathered the dynamite, the fuses, the matches. She retrieved the mare. The next night, the wind howled. The storm she had predicted arrived, a driving, freezing rain that turned the town's street to a river of mud. No one was out. The saloons were shuttered. Naylin rode both horses, Bolo and the mare, into the alley behind the jail. She tethered them close. She worked in the lashing rain, her hands numb. She wedged the 2 sticks of dynamite into the cracks in the old mortar at the base of the rear wall. She cut the fuse, her knife shaking. She struck a match. The wind blew it out. Again, it blew out. She tore a piece of her own dry shirt from beneath her blanket, shielded it with her body, and lit it. She held the small flame to the fuse. It caught a small, sputtering spark. She ran, pulling the horses farther down the alley. The explosion was not a boom. It was a dull, wet thump, swallowed by the storm. But it was enough. Smoke, brick dust, and steam filled the alley. A jagged man-sized hole had appeared in the back of the jail. From inside, she heard shouting, "Carver!" She ran to the hole, her rifle in her hand. Eli was there, staggering, pulling at the chain still attached to the wall. The blast had torn the anchor block loose. "Come!" she yelled. He stumbled out, dragging the heavy chain and block. Carver appeared in the doorway, his gun drawn. Naylin fired the rifle from her hip. The shot was wild, but it sent Carver diving for cover. She threw Eli onto Bolo's back. He was a dead weight. She leaped onto the mare. "Go! Go!" she screamed, slapping Bolo's rump. They burst from the alley onto the main street. Gunfire erupted behind them. A bullet whined past Naylin's ear. Another tore through the fleshy part of Eli's thigh. A hot, searing pain. He cried out, clutching the horse. "Hold on, Eli!" she yelled over the storm. "Just hold on!" They galloped out of the town, the shouts and gunshots fading behind them, swallowed by the roar of the wind and the driving rain. They rode west, into the black, unforgiving heart of the desert. 2 fugitives, one bleeding, riding all night toward an unknown dawn. The rain did not stop. It was a cold, driving sheet of water that turned the canyons into roaring rivers and the ground into a sucking, greedy mud. They had ridden all night, Naylin on the mare, Eli a dead, half-conscious weight on Bolo's back. He was chained to the saddle, not by iron, but by a rope she had lashed around his waist. Afraid he would fall. He was dying. She knew it. The beating in the town had broken something inside him. and the new bullet wound in his thigh was a dark, steady ooze that the rain could not wash away. He was shivering, a deep, bone-rattling tremor that was not just from the cold. It was the shock. It was the life leaving him. Naylin rode with her head bowed against the wind, her eyes scanning the dark, liquid landscape. She had no plan. She only had a direction. West, away from the town, away from the posse, away from the world of men. But the storm was an enemy, and Eli was fading. Just as the sky turned from black to a bruised, watery gray, she saw it, a dark shape on the horizon, rising from the flat, flooded plain. It was a cluster of walls, a broken tooth against the sky. She kicked the mare forward, pulling Bolo behind her. It was an old mission, Spanish, maybe, long since abandoned. The adobe walls were crumbling, melting back into the earth. The bell tower had collapsed, a pile of rubble and rotting timber. The church itself was a skeleton, its roof gone, its insides open to the rain. But it was shelter. She half-dragged, half-carried Eli from the horse, his dead weight nearly taking her down. He groaned, a low, animal sound of pure misery. She got him inside the driest part of the ruins, a small cell-like room off the main chapel that still had a portion of its roof intact. She laid him on a bed of dry, ancient dust and leaves. In the dim light, she saw how bad it was. His face was a swollen, purple mask. The new wound in his leg was ragged and deep. The chain from the jail was still attached to his wrist. The heavy anchor block a terrible reminder of her blast. She went back out into the storm for her saddlebags. She found the file. She sat, the rain lashing her back, and slowly sawed through the iron link. He was free of it. But he was not free. He was burning. The fever had taken him, a dry, consuming heat that had nothing to do with the cold air. He began to twist on the floor, his eyes rolling back. He was not in the mission. He was somewhere else. "Water," he moaned, his voice a dry rasp. "Sarah, the water." He was in the war. The fever was pulling the ghosts out of him, one by one. Naylin held her waterskin to his lips, but he thrashed, turning his head. Smoke," he whispered, his hand gripping her arm with a sudden, terrible strength. "I smell the smoke. God, the smoke! They're in the house! Sarah!" He cried out, a sound of such desolation that Naylin flinched. He was seeing it again. The raid that had taken his wife, the fire that had burned his life to the ground. She tended to him. She was not a nurse, but she was a survivor. She tore strips from her own shirt, soaked them in the rain, and washed the blood and grime from his face. She took the small flask of whiskey from his saddlebag, the one he had used on her wound, so long ago, and poured the last of it onto the bullet hole in his thigh. He screamed, a high, thin sound, and then went limp. She bandaged him tightly, her hands sure and strong. She covered him with his own saddle blanket. But the fever held him. His life was a torrent, and he was drowning in his own memories. He saw the faces of the men he had hunted for bounty, their eyes wide in the moment before the bullet struck. He saw the gray uniforms, the blood on the Georgia clay. He saw the firelight on Naylin's skin, the night they had finally come together. And then the one ghost who always waited, the one he could never escape, pushed through. He was back in New Mexico. The raid, the Mescalero woman, her hands tied, her eyes. She was not Naylin. She was not Sarah. She was just a woman. And he had turned his back. He saw her face, proud and terrified, as the men dragged her away. He heard the shot that followed. "I didn't," he moaned, his body arching off the floor. "I didn't stop it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." He was weeping, hot tears cutting trails through the dirt on his face. Naylin did not know these ghosts. She only knew the man. She saw the torment. She saw the spirit fighting to get out, or to get back in. She did not know the words of comfort. She did not know the white man's prayers, so she gave him the only thing she had. She sat beside him, her rifle across her lap, watching the broken doorway, and she began to sing. It was not a soft lullaby. It was an Apache song, a low, rhythmic chant. It was a song of endurance, a song for the mountains, for the wind. It was a song to tell the earth that they were still there, still breathing, still fighting. She sang to the spirits of the ruin, to the ghosts in his head. She sang to tell them to leave him be. Her voice, low and steady, was the only sound in the ruin, a counterpoint to the howl of the wind. For a day and a night, she sang. She did not sleep. She watched him burn. On the second morning, the rain stopped. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed, cold, and silent. And the fever broke. Eli's shivering stopped. The raging heat left his skin. He was just cold, so cold. He opened his eyes. One was swollen completely shut. The other, blurry and weak, tried to focus. He saw the gray light. He saw the crumbling adobe walls. He saw her. Naylin was sitting against the wall, her rifle in her lap. She had stopped singing. Her face was hollowed out by exhaustion. Her lips cracked, her hair matted with mud. She looked as broken as he felt. He saw the bandage on his leg. He saw the raw, angry skin of his wrist, free of the chain. He saw the state of her, and he remembered. The explosion, the ride, the blood. She had come for him. She had pulled him from the fire. He tried to speak. His throat was raw. I never deserved you. Naylin looked at him. Her eyes were old as the stones around them. She had seen him at his worst, his most broken, his most cowardly. This is not about deserving, she said, her voice flat with exhaustion. You did not take me, Eli. I came to you. The words settled between them. It was the simple, hard truth. He had not saved her for redemption. She had not saved him for gratitude. They were just two people, caught in the same trap, who had chosen to turn and face it together. She had made her choice, just as he had made his, back in the cabin. The debt was paid. They were equal. He was weak, but the shame was gone, replaced by a deep, weary peace. He slept. This time, it was a real sleep. They stayed in the ruin for 2 more days. Eli's body, tough and stubborn, began the slow, painful work of mending. He would not die from the beating. But the leg was bad. The bullet had torn the muscle, and the infection was a dull, hot throb. They spoke. In the quiet, cold afternoons, they spoke of the future, the talk of all fugitives. Carver, he'll come, Eli whispered, his voice stronger. He's like a dog on a scent. He won't stop. We will not be here when he does, Naylin said. She was outside, sharpening her knife on a smooth stone. Where? North, past the territory? Maybe. Mexico, he offered. I can't ride, but we could get to Mexico. They don't care about our laws. Naylin stopped sharpening. She looked out over the wide, empty expanse of the desert. The land was green for a little while. After the rain, I want a place, she said, her voice quiet, where no one decides who I am but me. She looked back at him, her eyes fierce. Not the army, not men like Carver, not even you, Eli. I want a place where my name is just my name, where my skin is just my skin. I do not know if that place is north or in Mexico or anywhere. He understood. It was not just escape she wanted. It was freedom, the freedom he had, and had never even seen, until she had shown him its price. The leg was not getting better. The edges of the wound were blackening. On the 3rd day, Naylin took the small campaign spade from his saddle gear. Eli watched her from the doorway, leaning against the adobe wall. She walked to a spot just outside the ruined chapel, under a lone, struggling mesquite tree. and she began to dig. The sound was a dull, rhythmic scrape and thud, and punctuation to the silence. Eli watched. He knew, with a cold, clear certainty, what she was doing. The ground was hard, rocky. She worked for an hour, her body moving with a steady, grim purpose. She was not digging a hole. She was carving a trench. It was shallow, but it was long. It was the length of a man. She was digging his grave. He said nothing. He just watched. There was no cruelty in it. It was the ultimate act of care. It was the pragmatism of the desert. The coyotes were always hungry. The buzzards were always watching. She finished, her face streaked with sweat. She came and sat beside him, leaning her back against the wall. "Just in case," she said, her voice flat. The animals, they will not have you." He looked at her. He saw the strength it had taken. To do that, to face the truth he was trying to ignore. "Nalin," he said, his voice a dry rasp. She turned to him. "Promise me, if Carver comes, you do not die for me. You do not do what I did. You do not stay. You run north. Find that place. Promise me." He was begging. He could not bear the thought of her dying for him. He was an old man. His race was run. She was just beginning. Nayland looked at him. Her eyes were not soft. They were hard, like the land. "No," she said. "Nayland, please, it's a fool's death. I'm done. You have to live." "You stayed," she said, her voice low and fierce. "In the cabin. When you saw the posse, you could have run. You could have given me to them. You stayed. You already did that for me." She would not make the promise. She would not leave him. She had said it. "I came to you." She would not be the one to run. The argument was over. Night came. The last of their food was gone. The water was low. Death was waiting. Just outside the wall, in the shallow grave she had built. It was cold, a deep, penetrating cold that the thin saddle blanket could not stop. Eli was shivering again, but this time, it was not fever. It was just the chill. Nayland lay down beside him on the dusty floor. She pushed his blanket aside and pressed her body against his. He was shocked by the contact, but she wrapped her arms around him, pulling his back against her chest, sharing her warmth. He could feel her breath on his neck, her heartbeat steady against his spine. He turned, slowly, painfully, to face her. They looked at each other in the deep, velvet dark. There were no words left. There was only this. He touched her face, his rough hand tracing the line of her cheek. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. This was not the gentle kiss of the sunset, or the desperate clash in the cabin. This was something else. It was raw, and it was desperate. It was the last, defiant act of two living souls in a world of death. It was a clinging, flesh and soul, holding on in the face of the grave. They came together not with passion, but with a kind of reverence, a need to affirm life, to feel a heartbeat, to share a breath. It was an intimacy born in the shadow of the gallows and the grave, a final, human protest. They held each other, two broken, scarred people, finding a desperate, aching solace in the dark. In the morning, the first sound Eli heard was not the wind. It was the metallic click of a rifle hammer being pulled back. He opened his eye. Nayland was already awake, her body rigid. She had heard it too. Gunfire exploded. A bullet smashed into the adobe wall above their heads, sending a shower of dirt and dust over them. "McRae!" The voice was a triumphant roar, echoing across the ruins. I told you I'd find you." "Carver." "Get down!" Eli shoved Nayland flat, grabbing his own rifle. "How many?" Nayland hissed, her knife appearing in her hand as if by magic. "Sounded like 4, maybe 5, Eli whispered. He crawled. his wounded leg dragging, useless, behind him, toward the crumbling window opening. "You're dead, McRae!" Carver yelled. "You and your savage whore! We're gonna burn you out!" Another volley of shots tore through the ruin. "They're jumpy," Eli grunted, resting his rifle on the window ledge. He was weak, his arm was shaking, but his eye was clear. He was a sharpshooter. It was the last thing he had. "Cover the door," he said. Naylin nodded, crawling to the other side of the room, her own rifle ready. Eli waited. He watched the rocks. He saw a flash of a blue shirt, a man trying to get a better angle. Eli breathed out. Slowly, he squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked, the sound a sharp slap in the canyon. A man screamed, a high, bubbling sound, and fell from the rocks. "One," Eli said, already reloading. "He's in the church," one of the posse yelled. "He's just one old man. Rush him!" "No, wait!" Carver roared, but it was too late. Two men, caught up in the bloodlust, broke cover and charged the main doorway of the chapel. Naylin was ready. She fired. The first man stumbled, clutching his chest, and fell. The second man, however, made it. He dove through the doorway, rolling, his pistol blazing. The bullets went wide in the dark. Naylin did not have time to reload. She dropped the rifle and rose from the shadows, her knife in her hand. The man scrambled to his feet, saw her, and raised his pistol. He was too slow. She moved like a shadow, a blur of motion. Her knife flashed. Once, twice. It was not a fight. It was an execution. The man gurgled, a look of profound surprise on his face, and fell backward, his pistol clattering on the stones. Silence. "3," Naylin whispered, her voice shaking. "Just Carver now," Eli said. "And one other. They'll be smarter." "Carver!" Eli yelled, his voice echoing in the ruins. "It's just you! Your friends are dead! Run, you coward! Run! And live!" He was trying to draw him out. You killed them!" Carver's voice was shaking, all the drunken bravado gone, replaced by a raw, murderous fury. "You'll pay for that, McRae! Both of you!" Carver stepped out from behind the ruined bell tower, his shotgun raised. Eli saw him. He was a clear shot. But Carver was not aiming at Eli. He was aiming at the other side of the room, at the shadow where Naylin was. Eli saw it, the fractional shift, the wide black eyes of the shotgun. He did not have time to think. He only had time to act. "Naylin, down!" he roared. He shoved himself up from the window, into the open, firing his rifle, trying to draw the shot. Carver flinched and fired. Eli's shot went wide. Carver's did not. It was not buckshot. It was a solid slug, meant for bear. Eli had shoved Naylin, but he had been too slow to save himself. The slug tore through the fleshy part of his good thigh, shattering the bone. He collapsed, a scream of pure, white-hot agony torn from his throat. His rifle fell from his hands. Naylin saw him fall. She saw the new, bright fountain of blood. She saw Carver, standing in the open, laughing, a triumphant, ugly sound, as he fumbled to reload his shotgun. And something inside her broke. The fear, the running, the hiding, the nights of terror, the chains, the memory of her sister, the beating Eli had taken. It all coalesced into a single point of pure, white heat. She let out a sound that was not a word, not a cry. It was a scream from the beginning of the world. She did not grab her rifle. She had her knife. She burst from the cover of the church, a low, running shadow, sprinting across the open ground. Carver looked up, his eyes wide. He fumbled with the shotgun shell, trying to close the breach. He was too slow. He had never, in his life, seen anything like her. She was on him. She did not hesitate. She did not stab. She slashed, Her arm, powered by all her rage and all her grief, came around in a single, horizontal arc. The blade was razor-sharp. It cut across his throat. A deep, terrible, gaping red smile. Carver dropped his shotgun. He made a sound, a wet gurgle. His hands flew to his neck, trying to hold his life in. His eyes, wide with a final, total surprise, looked at her. He fell to his knees, and then toppled, face first, into the dirt. The last man, the fifth man, saw it all. He saw Carver fall. He saw Nayland standing over the body, her face a mask of blood and fury. He dropped his rifle and ran. He fled, scrambling up the rocks, and did not look back. Silence. The only sound was the wind, whistling through the ruins. Nayland stood, her chest heaving, the bloody knife clutched in her hand. She was trembling. Then she remembered.
Eli!
She ran back into the ruin. He was on the floor, on his back, his leg. God, his leg! It was a ruin. He was bleeding. He was bleeding out, fast, the red-black pool spreading on the dusty floor. She fell to her knees beside him. She dropped the knife. She tried to stop the bleeding, pressing her hands to the ragged, terrible wound, but the blood just poured through her fingers. It was too much. It was his life, pumping out onto the dirt. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no, no!" She cradled his head in her lap, her body rocking. "Eli," she begged, the tears finally coming, hot and fast, washing streaks through the grime and blood on her face. "Stay with me. Stay. Just stay." He looked up at her. His one good eye was blurry. The world was going gray at the edges. He saw her face, floating above him. His angel, his rescuer. He tried to speak. A small, bloody cough was all that came out. "Just stay," she wept, holding him to her, as his life poured out into the cold, unforgiving earth. He was dead. The blood was everywhere. A slick, black pool on the chapel floor, and it would not stop. It pumped from his leg in a steady, terrible rhythm, in time with the last, failing beats of his heart. "No," Nayland whispered, her hands buried in the hot, gaping wound. The slug had torn through everything. "No, stay, Eli, stay!" He looked at her, but his eyes saw nothing. It was dull, the gray film of death already settling. She was alone in the ruin, with 5 dead men and the man she loved, and he was dying. She did not weep. The time for tears was a luxury she did not have. She was a survivor. She had been raised by a land that demanded pragmatism, and the land knew only one way to stop a flow like this: fire. She looked at the small pile of smoldering embers from their night fire. It was not enough. She scrambled to her feet, her hands slick with his blood. She ran into the main chapel, grabbing the dry, shattered pieces of the ancient wooden pews, the fallen roof timbers. Her breath came in raw, tearing sobs, but her hands were steady. She built the fire up, high and fast, a blazing, desperate pyre in the center of the holy room. She ran back to him. He was lighter now, his lifeblood soaking the earth. She grabbed him under the arms, his useless legs dragging, and pulled him, inch by agonizing inch, toward the heat. He groaned, a sound from a deep, unconscious place of pain. "I am sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I am sorry." She laid him close to the flames. The heat was a searing blast. Then she took her knife, the one she had used on Carver. She wiped it clean on her own torn shirt, and she thrust the blade into the very heart of the fire. She waited. She counted. She watched the steel turn from gray to blue, then to a bright, glowing cherry red. She pulled it out. The heat scorched her hand. She knelt beside him. "Forgive me, Eli," she murmured. She pressed the glowing blade deep into the ruined, open wound of his thigh. His body arched off the floor in a single, silent scream, a convulsion so violent it nearly threw her off. The smell of searing flesh, of his own life burning, filled the air. It was a terrible, holy, ungodly smell. He did not make a sound. He simply collapsed back, a thin wisp of smoke rising from his leg. And the bleeding stopped. She collapsed beside him, shaking, her strength gone. She had saved his life, but she knew, looking at the blackened, ruined limb, that she had also ended it. The Eli McRae who rode horses, the scout, the man of the land, he was gone. She had killed him to save him. The fifth man, the one who had run, he would be back, or he would tell others. They could not stay. She spent the rest of the day in a blur of frantic preparation. She found the horses, Bolo and the mare, still grazing, spooked, near the canyon. She took the pistol from the dead man in the chapel. She found a full canteen on Carver's body. She did not look at his face. She had to get Eli on the horse. He was a dead weight. He was conscious, but only barely. A low, continuous moan coming from his lips. It took her an hour of lifting, pulling, crying, and cursing. She finally rolled him onto Bolo's saddle like a sack of grain, lashing his hands to the pommel and his feet under the horse's belly. He was a prisoner again, this time to his own broken body. She mounted the mare, took Bolo's rein, and rode. She rode north, always north, into the high, broken country, the lands no one wanted, the lands the maps left blank. The next weeks were a red, blurred hell. Eli was delirious. The fever from the wound and the fire raged. He saw ghosts in every rock. He called out for Sarah, his dead wife, begging her to forgive him. He called out for the Mescalero woman, apologizing, his voice a dry rasp. And he called for Nalin, even when she was right there, bathing his face, forcing water between his cracked lips. Nalin, he would moan. Run, run north. Don't look back. I am here, she would whisper, her voice raw. I am not running. Sleep. She hunted for them. She set snares for rabbits, finding them just as she had told him, by watching the hawks. She found the roots she knew, the ones that cooled a fever, and she mashed them into a pulp, forcing the bitter juice into his mouth. She was his horse, his guide, his nurse, his hunter. She was his entire world. He was a burden. He was a dead weight. And she carried him, step by agonizing step, without a single thought of leaving him. One day, when the fever had just begun to break, he woke. He was clear-eyed. He saw her, her face gaunt, her hands scarred and bloody from the trail. He saw his own leg, stiff, black, and useless, strapped to the saddle. "Cut me loose," he whispered. "We are resting," she said, thinking he meant the ropes. No, his voice was terrible. "Cut me loose! Leave me! Nalin! I am done! I am a stone! I am dragging you to the bottom! Leave me!" She stared at him. She had just spent 2 weeks fighting the desert, the fever, and death itself for this man. She walked over to him. She did not have the strength for anger. She just looked at him, her eyes as deep and dark as the canyon. "You are not a stone," she said. "You are just heavy." She took her knife, but she did not cut his ropes. She sliced a piece of jerky and held it to his lips. "Eat. We ride in an hour." He had asked her to run. She had refused. She had asked him to eat. He obeyed. They found the valley by accident, or perhaps the land, sensing their final ounce of strength was gone, revealed it to them, a narrow cleft in a high mesa, hidden by a curtain of ancient, gnarled pines, opened up into a small, perfect bowl. It was no more than a mile wide, with a spring of clear, cold water bubbling from the rocks, a stand of aspen, and thick, sweet grass for the horses. It was hidden from the world below. It was untouched. "Here," Nalin said, sliding from the mare. "We stop here." Weeks passed, then a month. Nalin built a lean-to against the rock wall, a sturdy shelter of pine boughs and mud. Eli healed. The blackness of the wound faded, leaving a puckered, terrible scar that twisted his leg from thigh to knee. The first time he tried to stand, he fell. He fell, hard, into the dirt. The leg was a stiff, useless timber. It would not bend. It would not hold his weight. He lay there, this man who had been a scout, a hunter, a rider, and he wept. He wept for his own weakness, for the shame of it. He was a cripple. He was half a man, kept by a woman. Nalin watched him. She did not help him up. She let him lie there, let him feel the rage, the grief. When he was done, he looked up. She was holding out a long, sturdy piece of aspen, a stick she had carved. "You are not a stone," she said again. "You just need a new way to walk." He took the stick. He used it. He learned to move again, dragging the ruined leg in a heavy, painful limp. He was no longer the provider. He was the watcher. He sat by the shelter, his rifle across his lap, and he watched Nalin work. She was the one who hunted. She was the one who climbed the high rocks, who knew the land. She was grace and speed and power. He was the anchor. And a strange thing happened. The shame began to fade. He watched her, and he felt pride. He had seen this woman at her most broken, in chains, and he had seen her rise. He had seen her kill, and now he saw her live. She began to teach him. He was the student now. "The wind," she said one evening, holding her hand up. "It is from the north, cold. It means snow on the high peaks. It means the elk will move down. Tomorrow, I hunt." She taught him her language, not just words, the feeling of them. She would point to the sky, Yad il Hill, the sky, but it also meant the above, the spirit. She would touch his chest. "Ndi, the people." He was clumsy. His tongue fumbled the sounds, just as his leg fumbled the ground, but he learned. "And they planted a garden. It was his idea. He could not hunt, but he could work the earth. He used her knife to break the soil, kneeling, dragging himself through the dirt. They planted the last of the corn and beans he'd had in his saddlebags, and some wild onion bulbs Nalin found. It was an act of pure, desperate faith. It was the act of two people who had decided to stay. One day, late in the fall, a man rode into the valley. Eli's rifle was up in an instant, the hammer back. Nalin melted into the rocks, her own rifle aimed, her knife drawn. The man stopped. He was old, Mexican, on a mule laden with packs. He raised his hands, palms open. "Paz," he called. "Peace, I am just a trader." He was a comerciante, one of the men who walked the high, secret trails, trading with remote tribes and lonely settlers. He rode forward slowly. He saw the broken man with the rifle. He saw the Apache woman in the rocks. He saw the small, hopeful garden. He was a man who had seen everything, and he judged nothing. You have blankets?" Nalin asked, stepping out. They traded, 3 rabbit pelts for a heavy wool blanket. Eli, leaning on his stick, could not let him go. He had to know. "Trader," he said, his voice rough. "What news from the south? From the territory towns? We've been gone a long time." The trader, whose name was Mateo, packed his mule. He thought, chewing on a piece of dried tobacco. "The south," he mused. "Madness? Always. The army fights the wind. The towns, they are full of fools." He stopped, remembering a piece of gossip he'd heard in a cantina. There was a strange story. Weeks ago, a town, I do not recall the name, a drunk fool named Carver, a loud man. No one liked him. He and some friends went hunting, they say. They say he got drunk and fell on his own knife. Mateo chuckled. Cut his own throat. A hunting accident. Eli and Nalin looked at each other. "His friends," Mateo continued. "They ran back to the town, screaming. They said they were attacked by ghosts. An Apache demon, a phantasma. He laughed again. They said the ghost blew up the jail. They were drunk. No one believed them. The town was happy. They said Carver was an accident waiting to happen. He looked at Eli, at his scarred face. He looked at Naylin, at her fierce, quiet eyes. His gaze was knowing. Ghosts, Mateo said, shrugging. The desert is full of them. See, they forget. The world moves on. They have forgotten you. He tipped his hat, clicked to his mule, and rode out of the valley, leaving them in a silence that was deeper and more profound than any they had ever known. Forgotten. They were safe. The word was so new, so fragile, they did not dare say it aloud. They were not hunted. They were just here. Life settled. The winter was hard, but the valley protected them. The spring came, and their small garden pushed green shoots through the dark earth. It was a miracle. One afternoon, Naylin was checking her snares by the high ridge. She heard a sound. A cry. It was not an animal. It was a child. She moved through the brush, her knife in her hand. She found her near the stream that fed their valley. A little girl, no more than 6. Her hair was a pale, matted blonde. Her dress was fine linen, but torn to rags. She was alone, weeping, her body thin to the point of starvation. When the girl saw Naylin, she screamed, a sound of pure terror, and scrambled backward, pressing herself against a rock. Naylin stopped. She saw the blue eyes, the pale skin, a white child, the source of all her pain, all her loss. And she saw the fear, the same bottomless terror she had felt in the cabin, the same terror she had felt when she was chained. She looked at the child, and she did not see an enemy. She saw herself. Slowly, she sheathed her knife. She sat on the ground, 10 feet away. She reached into her pouch and pulled out a small piece of dried fruit. She set it on the rock between them, and she sat, and she waited. It took an hour. The girl finally, her hands shaking, snatched the fruit and ate it. Naylin followed the small, weak tracks. She found it, a mile down the canyon, a broken wagon, a Conestoga. It had shattered a wheel, toppled into a gully. There were 2 graves, new, marked by rough, hasty crosses. Her parents, dead, a wagon crash, or the fever that followed. The girl had been alone for days. Naylin held out her hand. The girl, shaking, took it. When Eli saw her leading the child into the valley, his heart stopped. He saw the blonde hair, the blue eyes. He saw a ghost. He saw Sarah. He saw the daughter he and Sarah had always talked about. It was a pain so sharp, so sudden. He staggered, leaning on his stick. They took the girl in. She did not speak for 3 days. She just sat by the fire, her eyes wide, watching them. They gave her a name, Anna. Naylin was tender. Eli watched, amazed, as this woman, this warrior who had slit a man's throat without flinching, now gently washed the girl's hair, her fingers untangling the knots. He watched her carve a small doll from a piece of aspen wood. He was afraid. This child was a new vulnerability. She was a link to the white world they had escaped. That night, Anna was asleep, wrapped in their new wool blanket. Eli and Naylin sat by the fire. We cannot keep her, Eli whispered. His voice was heavy with a sorrow he did not understand. She is white. When she is well, we have to take her to a town, to her people. Naylin looked at him. Her people are dead. We saw the graves. But she does not belong with us, Eli argued, but his heart was not in it. Why? Naylin's voice was quiet, but it had the strength of the mountain. Because her skin is pale? Because she is not Apache? Because they will look for her. They will find her. They will find us. Who? Naylin said. Mateo told us, we are forgotten. We are ghosts. She is an orphan, like us, the world. It has left her here, just as it left us. Nayland looked at the sleeping girl, her face soft in the firelight. They sold my sister, Ahawi, because her skin was brown. They burned your wife, because they were men full of hate. They live by those rules. They decide who is a person and who is a thing. She reached out, her hand gently touching the girl's hair. We can raise her, Nayland said, her voice thick. We can teach her. We can teach her my language and your language. We can teach her how to read the wind and how to plant a garden. We can raise her like they never let us be. Eli looked at her. He saw the truth. This was not about revenge. It was not about anger. It was about grace. Nayland, who had lost everything, was choosing to build. She was choosing to break the cycle of hate. He looked at the small, sleeping child. He saw Anna, not a ghost, just a little girl who needed a home. The world, he said, his voice rough. It remains uncertain. It is a hard place. The world is always uncertain, Nayland said, laying her hand over his. But we are here, that is all. He nodded. He agreed. The valley became their home. The girl, Anna, began to laugh. The sound was strange and sharp and beautiful. She learned to call him Abba, a name for father. She called Nalin Shima, mother. One night, after Anna was asleep, Nayland and Eli stood outside. The high desert air was cold. The stars so close he felt he could touch them. The valley was quiet, safe. Nalin stared up into the vast, glittering darkness. Will they always come for us? She whispered. The peace was real, but the fear was a scar, and it still ached when the weather changed. Eli stood beside her, his weight resting on his stick. He was an old man now. His hair was gray, his leg was a stiff, aching timber. He was scarred, and he was broken. But he was not the man he had been. He was not the ghost, waiting to die in a lonely cabin. He looked at the sky, the same sky she had taught him to read. Let them, he said, his voice a low, quiet rumble. He reached into his belt and touched the pistol he always wore. I've only got one bullet left in this gun. I've been saving it. He turned and put his arm around her, pulling her close. She leaned her head against his rough chest, sliding her arms around his waist. Let them come, he whispered into her hair, because for the first time in my whole, broken life, I've got something worth dying for. She held him tighter. They stood in the moonlight, two scarred, hunted souls, deeply, quietly, and profoundly in love. The wind howled, coming down from the high peaks, whistling through the canyon. It carried their story, scattering it like dust, a story of blood and fire and survival, part legend, part truth. In a world where love was forbidden, they made a place for it anyway. Thank you for listening to our story. Please comment where you are listening from to connect with others. Subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in English.